Everyone in the world knows Chuck Norris as the personification of strength and speed. He has won 6 world karate titles. Star off more than 30 action movies. The person whose name became a joke around the world. Thank you for millions of people as the personification of overwhelming power. But there's a truth: the memes didn't say anything. Behind every on-screen punch, there's a story. With a steely look in every joke about how strong he is. Because even though that Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he pushes the earth down, people laughed. The real man was fighting no a black belt could win. Such terrible losses that 1,000 trophies could make them better. And a weakness so deep that music would change a sign of unbreakable strength into a person who was trapped in his own body. What did a boy do, being beaten by his dad, not being seen at school, and being frozen by fear become the we know the story? What went on behind the scenes that changed the honor into shame? And why has the man everyone thinks is immortal died twice in the last few years? Even though the memes kept saying that he was unbeatable. We need to go back to the beginning before we answer. Due to Chuck Norris's real stories don't begin in title rings or on movie sets. It began in an Oklahoma home where life was the only thing that could be won. Chuck Norris was born Carlos Ray Norris on March 10, 1940, in Ryan, Oklahoma. He went to opera. People in crime are already bringing the world to its knees. His Ray Norris, my dad, wasn't a provider, he was a hunter in his own home. The man's hands spoke more than any love words ever could. Ray was a mechanic, a hero of World War II, and most of all, a crazy alcoholic who turned to God. Every paycheck turned into whiskey, and every night of music turned into a war zone. Chuck would later say in an honest, painful way, "My dad never touched me, only hit me." That lack of love and everyday fear made the wounds deeper than any punch from an opponent ever would. The Norris house was a horrible place to live, putting on a family mask. Ray's angry fits when he was drunk were unexpected and cruel. Things broke and doors slammed. And little Chuck, along with his 2 Lan and Aaron, 2 younger boys, learned how to blend in with their surroundings. In the corners, they hid and prayed that the storm would miss them. But being invisible wasn't a promise of safety. Chuck thought back to how his dad would suddenly start playing music and grabbing him by the shirt and yelling right next to his face. Their breath smelled like booze. Anger. "You're worthless," Ray would swear. "You'll never be anything." Those people words spoken, music, with poison by the man a boy wants to please the most turned into a curse Chuck carried into for decades to come, every fight, every interview, and every quiet night. His Wilma, the mother, tried to protect her boys, but she was just as trapped as they were. The waitress works 2 shifts just to make sure there is food for everyone. Ray was dangerous, and she couldn't stop him. Chuck looked. She took hits that were meant for him, saw her jump when Ray's truck pulled into the yard, and learned early on, I learned that love often came with pain. School wasn't a getaway. Chuck was the boy who no one saw because he was shy, skinny, and stuttered with nervousness. Sat behind. He was too shy to speak up and too embarrassed to make friends. His marks, worn out clothes, and the way he tried to hide them were all seen by his classmates. Jerked when someone spoke louder. Bullies didn't bother with him because he wasn't worth it. The man was just forgotten. There is a ghost moving through the halls, but no one can see it. Inside, poverty always hung over things. The Norris family moved all the time, following Ray's inconsistent work from Oklahoma to Missouri to Kansas to United States. Never stayed long enough to put down roots. Every new town was different. Ray has a chance to fail. Another rental home that smelled like mold and hopelessness. Chuck slept on the ground in war-used shoes until they were worn out and learned that hunger was just another kind of pain that you hid from other people. Chuck had, by the time he was a teenager, taken a decision that he would spend his whole life trying to change. "I'm not enough," that message was etched into his bones by his father's hands. The fact that his mother was so tired proved it. The mirror showed a skinny, weak kid who had no future, no ability, and no reason to hope. Then, when he was 18, Chuck made a choice based on despair rather than drive. He joined the U.S. Air Force not to seek fame, but to escape it. He was running away from the only safe place he had ever known as home. "I didn't join the military to serve my country. I joined to serve myself," he said later. To get away from my dad. But Chuck would soon learn that freedom wasn't real. You can leave a home, a town, or a country, but the cuts you've made in the child's soul follows him around, whispering music in every moment of doubt, every failure, and every mirror that shows not strength but the fear of the boy who was still waiting for his father to say, just once, "You did something great." The fighter wasn't born in a dojo. Formed by violence, shame, and the need to stay alive. It was also Chuck Norris's first fight ever. Fought just to believe he deserved to be alive. The Air Force told Chuck Norris get away, but the music only made things worse. He was stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea, in 1958. He was put in charge of military police, which sounds like a good job. He was in charge, but he didn't feel complete. He was still the shy, skinny kid from school. It was cold and lonely in Korea, and he felt like he wasn't becoming the man he wanted to be. While his fellow soldiers bonded over drinks and card games, Chuck stayed on the edges, too scared to join in and too troubled by the sound of his father's words. He didn't feel like he fit anywhere. He later admitted, "I was lost. I had no identity, not sure of yourself. Being there was not life for me. The being alone was being choked." Even though he was thousands of miles from home and with strangers, Chuck felt the same feeling of not being seen that had defined his youth. He wrote his mom letters that he never sent. He wasn't able to answer the questions. What am I? How much am I worth? What will I be one day? What's worse than Ray Norris's bad son? After that, moving around in the streets, Chuck was in Osan on a rare day off when he came across a small dojang, a Korean school for martial arts. From the window, he could see guys moving carefully and power, their bodies tools of control, and the calm focus on their faces. Chuck Norris saw strength that wasn't based on anger for the first time in his life. He stood outside of that window for almost an hour, afraid to let the music in. The old shame said its usual decision in a whisper. You're bad. Enough. You're going to look bad. Come back to the base. But there was more. For some reason, he was pushed through the door. The teacher, a worn-out Korean master whose name was Chuck, later honor, but never fully say, looked at the shaking American boy and saw not weakness but chance. The master asked, "Do you want to learn?" English that doesn't work. Chuck could only nod and not speak. Then you work. No excuses. That first class broke every idea Chuck had about himself. His body was weak, he moved badly, and he had no balance at all. Some other kids, about half his size, moved gracefully while Chuck tripped and fell. Wetness bored. Body parts screamed. Still, failing felt real to him for the first time in his life. Not the same. It wasn't his dad's fist or a friend making fun of him. It was the teacher's gentle correction. Again, this time better. Tang So-do was a Korean form of martial arts. Chuck learned that wasn't just about throws and kicks. It was an idea, a set of rules, a way to turn pain into power. It was taught to him by his master that a warrior's strength comes from duty, not anger. That's right, being powerful doesn't mean controlling other people, it means controlling yourself. Chuck went back to that dojang every night. His body hurt. His hands struck by wooden boards and bled. However, he was becoming more awake, something that had been sleeping since it was a kid. He had finally found a language his body could understand. A way to say things that words could never do. Even so, progress was painfully slow. Take your time. He worked hard for months before he got his first belt. Other students moved on. Their natural skill makes Chuck's hard-won wins look weak by comparison. In contrast, he felt like giving up some nights. The old voice came back. Don't waste your time. You'll never be good enough, she said. But the master saw what she meant. Chuck was unable to. Talent is nothing, he told him one night after a especially hard exercise session. It's important to keep going. The classmate, the person who doesn't give up will always beat the person who counts on gifts. Those words, Chuck would say this over and over again for the rest of his life. By the time with the end of his tour in Korea in 1962, Chuck Norris was no longer the scared boy who had run away from his dad's house. He was still shy, scared, and quiet, having wounds that will not heal for decades. He had found something else, though, more important than trust. He was on the right track. The soldier was beginning to show, not from one moment of victory but from 1,000 small refusals to give up. Iraq did not make Chuck Norris stronger. It taught him that being strong meant making a choice every day, even when no one was looking. I was looking. He would soon be put to the test in ways he could never have imagined. Think about it. When Chuck Norris came back to the United States in 1962, he wore his black belt like a shield. But when he got back home, no one knew how to use Korean martial arts. In the United States, almost no one knew who Sudo was. A few karate schools were around, spread out, and looked at with suspicion. And Chuck, who is now married to his high school sweetheart Diane Holacek, his high school sweetheart, and working dead-end jobs to make ends meet, found himself back to where he began. invisible, suffering, and not sure if he had done something very wrong. He worked at Northrop Aviation Inn as a file worker, Los Angeles, sorting papers in rooms with artificial lighting that made me think of jails. The pay was bad, and the work was hard. It breaks my heart. And every morning when Chuck woke up, he felt the old shame come back. His dad's voice was always close by and whispered its usual poison: "You're not worth anything. You'll never be anything." But in the evenings, after Diane went to sleep, and their small apartment became quiet, Chuck would work on his kicks in the hallway, which was not very wide. Punches a makeshift heavy bag that's hung from the ceiling, forms over and over until thought was replaced by muscle memory. He wasn't training for a certain reason, he was getting ready to make it through the quiet and show himself that Korea hadn't happened. Been a dream. Finally, in 1964, he had no choice but to give up. With bills stacking up and a family to feed, Chuck opened his first karate school in California, in Torrance. It was a small shop with broken mirrors and the floor squeaked every time you walked on it. He did not have any kids, a good name, or there's a good chance that anyone could walk through that door. No one did for weeks. Chuck sat by himself in a gym that was empty, seeing the cars go by. Each one was a sign of how bad he was. Afterward, he said, "I thought I had done the worst thing in my life. I was ready to give up and shut the doors, but slowly and painfully, the students started to first one, then 3, and then a dozen. Most of them were interested hobbyists. They came to Chuck to learn self-defense, but he taught them with the same strictness that his Korean master had taught him. Over skill, persistence over strength, and respect over all else." Word spread softly through the martial arts community in Los Angeles. This quiet, humble teacher with the soft voice and those crushing kicks were the real deal. Then, in 1967, music, Chuck came into his first big competition, the All-American Karate Championships. He didn't win by being flashy, but with cold precision. Each hit was calculated, and every move was planned. Chuck had no idea that success would lead to such a wonderful place. The people in charge of the competition wanted him, and other schools challenged him. The boy who had been ignored his whole life was now finally being seen. In the years 1968 to 1974, Chuck Norris was a huge deal in karate competitions. He won title after title, beating famous people like Joe Louis, Skipper Mullins, and Alan Steen. 6 times he beat them. Was named the world middleweight karate winner. No one could beat his record. 183 wins and 10 losses, which was almost a magical win rate. But even at the top of his game, Chuck felt the empty pain of being missing something. Trophies were nice to have, but they didn't pay the bills. Championships, on the other hand, gained respect, but they couldn't get rid of the ghost of his father. He was the best fighter in the world and still had to live paycheck to paycheck. Getting paid, still not sure if this was all his life would ever be about. Warrior had risen, his skills were undeniable, and no one could beat his focus. His name was revered in dojos all over the United States. But Chuck Norris was about to learn the most important lesson of all: being the best at something makes you humble. Doesn't care about is just a different kind of walking around without being seen. To happen on movie sets, or a chance meeting with a rising star named Bruce Lee would be the setting for the story. Change everything. Chuck Norris had ruled the martial arts by the early 1970s. But Hollywood wasn't interested in a quiet karate master with blue eyes. Winner from Oklahoma with a draw. Casting directors looked at him and liked what they saw. And didn't see anything. It was too stiff and plain. He had no charm. One agent told him straight out, "You're a great fighter, but you'll never be a performer." Chuck went through audition after audition, and each one ended in a polite no, or, even worse, quiet. He would drive home from karate school, sit alone in his car in the empty lot and think about how much time he had lost. He spent years trying to reach a goal that was never meant to be his. Things that were gathering dust in his office felt like shrines to things that didn't matter. Then, one phone call in 1968 changed everything. Bruce Lee, who was already a rising star from his part in The Green Hornet, had heard of Chuck's music and wanted to meet him, but not for a movie. Bruce just wanted to train with the best, not get attention. And Chuck Norris was the best. It was the best. Their first practice wasn't a fight, but warriors talking to each other. Bruce's lightning-fast speed met Chuck's steady speed. His mindset and Chuck's discipline came together, and within hours, they became friends, which would change both of their lives. Bruce saw something in Chuck. What Hollywood couldn't: a quiet focus, the realness of a warrior, and you need to be in a place that cameras will eventually learn to love. Movies, Bruce told him one afternoon over lunch. Chuck laughed and gave Bruce a run for his money. Bruce wasn't joking about all the times he was turned down. Trust me, they won't know what they want until you show them. That promise was kept by Bruce, who made Chuck the main bad guy in Way of the Dragon, a part that needed no words but pure body language. The movie's most important fight scene, which was filmed in Rome's Colosseum, became a classic. A hero right away. Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris fought for 7 minutes in what many people still think it's the best martial arts fight ever filmed. The scene was harsh poetry, and Chuck's character, Colt, was scary. Methodical and completely realistic. When Bruce finally beat him, people were shocked. People all over the world felt that win because Chuck had made them think that music, could not be beat. The man who Hollywood had written off overnight became a name that everyone in the martial arts world talked about, but the victory was not all good. Bruce Lee, the man who had started the door for Chuck, died suddenly in July 1973. He was only 32 years old. Was given the diagnosis of cerebral edema, but the sadness and mystery surrounding his death really upset Chuck. He had lost a friend, a teacher, and a partner, his best friend and the only person in Hollywood who believed in him when no one else did. Chuck went to Bruce's funeral in a fog of sadness and watched as his body was brought past the mourners, who had no idea how much the world had lost. "I loved Bruce like a brother," Chuck later confessed, his voice breaking even decades after. His death made a space that could not be filled. Chuck tried for months but couldn't find driving force. The film deals that came in slowly felt empty without Bruce to give them to. He felt guilty all the time. Why Bruce? Why not me? The duty of survivors, that kind of pain, and Chuck carried it in silence, just like he always did. Figured out how to carry everything else. But slowly and painfully, Chuck started to remember Bruce in the only way he knew how, by not give up. He was in low-budget action movies like Breaker, and Good Men Dress in Black. Movies that audiences loved but reviewers didn't like. They weren't works of art, but they were his. Chuck learned how to be more at ease in front of the camera, so his presence would speak stronger than any words. In the late 1970s, in action movies, Chuck Norris had become a regular. Still not a star, but an actor who worked and a martial artist who had entered a world that had once turned him away. The turns down it still hurt. The thought of Bruce still hurts. But Chuck knew what to do next. Bruce tried to teach him. Every door can be broken down with persistence. In the end, Hollywood did take notice of Chuck Norris. The question now was whether he could keep their attention long enough to grow into more than just a fighter who could do things. He was about to find out. By the 1980s, Chuck Norris had worked hard to become a well-known action star, being a star. Some crazy movies are The Octagon, Lone Wolf McQuade, and he became well-known after the Missing in Action trilogy did so well. He wasn't as good as Bond or Schwarzenegger, but he didn't have to be. Chuck had cut out stay in his own lane. The quiet American hero, the man who didn't say much, the warrior who let his hands, music, do the talking, did a terrible thing. However, 1993 was the year he got the part that would define him for all time. Walker, the USA Ranger, which was meant to be a simple action drama, made its debut on CBS. Became a big deal in pop culture and ran for 8 seasons and 203 episodes. Taking over Saturday nights and becoming a must-see for millions of families. Cordell Walker was played by Chuck. He was a Texas Ranger who solved crimes with equal skill, mixed martial arts and strong morals. The show was blatantly old-fashioned, with good versus evil and justice being the main theme. Always won, and a hero who never changed his mind about what was right. Not fans made fun of it by calling it simple, routine, and even cheesy. People didn't care, though. They longed for the security that Walker represented. The thought that one man with respect, discipline, and music could still make the world is right. Over 15 million people watched Walker Texas Ranger at its best. Each episode, shown in more than 100 countries, turned into dozens of ways to talk. From Seoul to São Paulo, people watched to see Chuck Norris give big kicks and lessons in life all at the same time. He was no longer just an action star. He was a figure of honor. Of American strength and ideals that are known all over the world. It was the show that made Chuck incredibly rich. He was making more than $75,000 per show with back end at one point. He is now worth more than $70 million thanks to deals and syndication fees. He had farms in Texas, fancy homes in California, and his own private jet. The kid who used to sleep on the floor and wear used shoes now ran a kingdom that was based on hard work and was impossible to break. Discipline. While that success was great, there were still familiar clouds below the surface. Held on. The production plan was very strict. 16-hour days, 6-day weeks, months away from home. Later, Chuck said, "I was trying so hard. I worked hard to show I deserved success, I forgot to enjoy it." His marriage to Diane, years of travel and being far away made them weak, and the weight of fame made them break. Then there was the event that made Chuck a celebrity instead of just an icon. Facts about Chuck Norris. Starting in the mid-2000s, the internet was full of crazy, exaggerated facts that were meant to celebrate he was unbeatable. There are no push-ups by Chuck Norris. He makes the earth fall. Chuck Norris doesn't turn on the lights when he walks into a room, turn on the lights. He turns off the lights. What began as a joke spread around the world. Movement. There were thousands of facts going around, and each one was more ridiculous than the last. Chuck was both the joke and the hero at the same time. Before jokes took over culture, there was this famous people talked about him. The jokes were used by presidents. Even Chuck himself later, she laughed and said, "I don't understand half of them, but I'm honored. People think I'm that tough." The memes brought Chuck back to life and many people who had never seen Walker, Texas Ranger, or any of his other movies. He was not just a movie star from the 1980s and 1990s. He was a music icon for all time who stood for power, resilience, and crazy, overwhelming power. That is, while everyone laughed and happy, Chuck faced a more peaceful truth. The fame that was all around him started to feel hollow. Everyone knew who he was, but almost no one really knew him. Friends were business partners, music, and hangers-on have taken their place. Also, the question that had been following him around since he was a kid came back stronger than ever. Who am I? What time do the cams shut down? When he was at his strongest, Chuck Norris had everything about music that he used to believe would heal him. Money, fame, and the love. Still, he felt alone on his Texas ranch, where the sky was very clear. The same loneliness that had been a big part of his childhood. The fighter had won over the world. But the real fights were the ones that were fought in silence. Shadow, we were just getting started. Chuck Norris got the on December 1, 2013. Every parent fears the worst, the phone call. The type that breaks time itself and puts life and music into two parts, before and after. He had a daughter named Dina Dukaili. Gone. She died at just 46 years old from problems caused by a heart attack, quickly, without warning, and cruelly. Chuck's oldest daughter was Dina. This was his first marriage to Diane. Even though their relationship had always been hard because of distance and complexity, Chuck had worked hard when Dina was a child, going after tournaments, then movie parts, and finally Dina.TV is very popular. He was there in name only. He wasn't a part of the daily activities of. He made the mistake of becoming a father, which he would later deeply regret when the marriage to Diane finally ended after 30 years in 1988. The breakup wasn't just the end of a relationship. This caused rifts between Chuck and his kids. It's not miles that measure distance, but moments that are lost, the silent words and the slow loss of link that happen when a father dies puts power ahead of intimacy. Dina had watched her dad as a child become a celebrity while still getting to know him as a person. She got married and built her own home. She had her own life and raised her own family, but her friendship with Chuck stayed friendly but far away, like two people who shared blood but weren't close. Chuck thought there had always been time to mend what was broken and build a bridge between gap, to finally say what was left out. Then, in a single phone call, the time is up. The funeral was too painful to bear. Chuck stood next to Dina's casket, which was filled with her children, brothers, and other people who knew her. He did much better than he ever had. He felt guilty all at once. Not just that the natural grief of losing a kid is enough to break any parent, but the sharp, painful guilt of realizing he had let her down when it most important. I wasn't there, Chuck told a close friend a few weeks later. His voice was almost a whisper. I thought I was leaving them something, a legacy or safety. But what good is that? What good is it if I wasn't there when they needed me? That was the honest kind of thing to say. Chuck almost never gave himself that kind of freedom. The kind that takes away all defenses and leaves only raw, bleeding truth. Chuck pulled away in the months after Dina's death. He canceled events, stepped back from projects and music, and spent a lot of time by himself at his ranch in Texas. People who knew him saw a guy who had always been calm, orderly, and in charge. Now she looked shaken and was carrying. Even his famous strength wasn't enough to lift the weight, so he started to play back memories, but not the happy ones. Broadcast to millions of people, but he had missed the quiet, everyday moments. He missed birthdays, school plays, and phone calls because he had to film them. They cut it short because they had a meeting to go to. Each memory was like a small knife, and together, they made a wound that would never heal with prizes and fame. Chuck also faced the uncomfortable truth. The truth about his second marriage to Gina O'Kelly, whom he married in 1998. He spent more time with his twin sons Dakota and Dan since he started dating Gina Lee, who was trying very hard to do better after failing in the past. Even though he needed to grow, that growth made the pain of what he hadn't given Dina and his older boys worse, Chris and Mike. You can't go back, Chuck said in a rare interview. You can say sorry later. You can change. You can get better as time goes on, but you can't take back what you did. No shows. That's something I'll always have with me. Chuck had to face his own fate in a way that Dina's death did not. Experiences in movie stunts never had. He had lived through falls, car accidents, on set there were blasts and even broken bones. They were always bouncing back because warriors don't give up, but this was different. This wasn't something that practice or music, persistence could fix. Death had taken his daughter, and no amount of strength, wealth, or fame could make him feel better. Could undo it. Chuck's friends noticed a big change in him after 2013. The man whose reputation was built on being indestructible showed the cracks he had. He spoke less loudly and listened more carefully. And when people asked him what he regretted most, he no longer tried to avoid the question by being funny or humble. When they were young, he said straight out, "That's the only fight I can say I lost." It was bad for Chuck Norris to lose Dina, but it wasn't the end of the world. He was changed. It was too late to teach him that the most important fights are the ones that matter. Fight not in ring or on screen, but in living rooms and over dinner. In a way that says, "You matter. I'm here." And as Chuck stood there, lonely under the big Texas sky, he cried over a girl he could no longer hold. Knew very clearly that some wounds will never heal. They just become a part of who you are. In 2017, just as Chuck Norris was getting in the decades after Dina's death, his body gave a verdict that was out of balance. The making. The warrior was going to die, and death doesn't bargain. Chuck had been ignoring the signs his body was sending him for years. Tightness in the chest during workouts, shortness of breath when going up and down stairs, and a constant tiredness that discipline and willpower was no longer strong enough to win. He was 77 years old, and his mind, even though he still thought he was the unbeatable fighter from the championship rings, his heart was slowly failing. The finding was made like a hammer. Heart valve disease that is very bad. Several blockages. His heart, the engine that had driven 60 years of kicks, stunts, and non-stop work, which was cutting off its own supply lines. If nothing is done right away, the doctors told him straight out that he was likely to have a major heart attack, killing. Chuck, the man whose whole character was based on being independent and strength, and all of a sudden needed doctors, monitors, and a hospital bed. He couldn't get away by force of will. In August 2017, he went through a double bypass surgery. Was his first big heart surgery. 6 very hard hours on a table for surgery. When his chest opened, his heart stopped for a short time, while machines kept him living. For a man who liked being in charge, the feeling helpless was killing me. He later said, "I was lying there knowing someone. It was scarier than any fight I'd ever been in, that someone else was holding my heart in their hands. Was terrible. My sternum cracked open, and it's healing slowly and terribly. Being able to do simple things like sitting up or music, taking a big breath made Chuck feel like he had failed. Did 1,000 push-ups without getting tired, but now she needed help to get to the bathroom. Nurses watched her closely. There were beeps from the monitors, and in the quiet between them, Chuck talked to he had spent his whole life avoiding the truth. He was weak. His wife, Gina, saved his life. She kept an eye on his medicines, made him rest, and wouldn't let him go out. To let Chuck fall into the sadness that followed him around in those first few weeks. "She saved my life," Chuck would say. Later say, not in a figurative way, but in a literal way. "I was ready to give up. Shay couldn't do it." The trouble wasn't over, though. Things went wrong in 2020. Scar new blocks were made by tissue from the first surgery. His heart, which was already weak, was having a hard time with the stress. The doctors came to a different conclusion. He had to have a second surgery, this time to put in stances and open up airways that had become narrow again. The second surgery happened at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Chuck wasn't ready for the levels of fear and loneliness he felt. People who went to hospitals were in war zones. Chuck was banned, and he had to face the very real. There was a chance that Gina and his boys wouldn't be there to say goodbye if something went wrong. "I thought about Dina," Chuck told a friend months later what he had done. "I thought about ending my life without. I told my kids everything I needed to." The fear was worse than the pain. He got through it again. It took longer and was harder to heal the second time. By obstacles that, music, put all of his legendary discipline to the test. What physical therapy sessions were like embarrassment. His body, which was once strong but was now scarred and weak, wouldn't do what he said. It used to be easy to follow orders. The fighter who had never given up had to learn how to fight again. Strolling, not hurting, not having to work hard to breathe, and not feeling bad about asking for help. The health problem made Chuck, music, face the truth. He had spent decades telling people to be disciplined and tough, not showing weakness in the face of pain. But something else was needed to stay alive. Don't fight. They told him he couldn't do it by himself. Sometimes letting that strength show it looks like you need help. The doctors put him on strict rules. Low sodium diet, daily drugs, and exercise under supervision. Stop faking that he was 40 years old. Every pill was a heads up. Every trip to the doctor is a review. And once a picture of strength, the mirror now showed an old man with scars all over his body. Running down his chest like cracks in a building that is falling apart. Later, Chuck said, "Those surgeries but losing a fight never made me feel that humble. In the ring, you get back up on your feet. You just want someone else to put you back together on that operating table." Chuck Norris's body finally needed a break after 60 years of fighting, stunts, and becoming a star. Chuck had to listen for the first time ever. On January 4, 2024, Chuck Norris was getting close to his 84th birthday. Life, music, dealt you another devastating blow. His younger brother, Whelan Norris, was the quiet middle child who had told his siblings about their violent father and how poor they were. They grew up in Oklahoma, died suddenly at age 79. Whelan came up with "Try to Get Attention." As Chuck became famous around the world and their younger brother Aaron made a name for himself, as Whelan was a Hollywood director, but he stayed out of the spotlight and lived a simple life. A long way from cameras and fame. It was more than just a brother to Chuck. He was at the scene. One of the few people still living who could remember what life was like before the fame and empire. They were just scared boys running away from their dad's hands. The link between they had been shaped by hard times. When Ray was drunk and angry, they gathered together and shared the shame of the wore used clothes to school and made silent promises to each other that one day, they would find a way to make it happen. Would get away. When Chuck joined the Air Force, Whelan was there. Having watched Chuck's early games and cheered him on. And when Land finally did get lucky, he never asked for nothing but a phone call every once in a while and the knowledge that his bigger brother knew where they came from. But space had made holes, as it often does. Chuck won't give up. Walker, Texas Ranger years, when there were health problems and personal tragedies, the schedule meant that months would between talks. You can. Cards were sent to celebrate birthdays, holiday calls were short, and there was always the unspoken expectation that Whelan would always be there for Chuck when he was ready to take it easy and remember the good old days. Back in the day. After that, the call came. Whelan had a sudden event with his heart. It was over before anyone could say goodbye. Chuck heard the news in Texas News. As he sat down, his phone stayed in his hand. For a long time, stared at nothing for a while. That's where Gina found him, still and quiet. A man whose famous calmness had finally broken. The funeral was not very big, there were only close family members there, who had tried to stay out of the public eye. Chuck stood by the grave, where his body still had scars from 2 heart surgeries, and watched as the casket was lowered, place Whelan on the ground. People close to him saw him cry. Even though he didn't cry, there was a crack behind his eyes. He was the last link to the person I used to be. All of this, Chuck told Aaron in a low voice afterward. Now that Whelan is gone, I'm the only one who remembers Dad's hands, Mom's tiredness, and the hunger. Everyone else who lived through it is dead. There was a certain kind of loneliness. The kind that happens when the first people who knew you start to disappear. When the past that shaped you is shared now only in your own mind, and can be lost over time. Death of Whelan also made Chuck face his own death with a new sense of urgency. 2 heart surgery, Dina is dead, and his parents have been buried for a long time. We're now on land. The math had to be done. Chuck was 83 years old, and he was almost at the finish line. Getting off the ground. Friends saw the change right away. Chuck got even. He spends more time with his twin boys, Dakota and Dan Lee, who are now in their mid-20s. He called back more quickly. He was more honest when he said, "I love you." Whenever one asked about his legacy, he stopped talking about movies or titles. He talked about being there and not letting someone he loved go by without saying anything. Chuck Norris wasn't broken when Whelan died, but his loss left him empty in a way that Dina's death hadn't. Because Whelan stood for the start, the past, and the proof that Chuck hadn't. That always been the story everyone knew. And Land was gone, leaving Chuck. He was the only one who could remember his childhood and was alone with his thoughts. Stayed alive to remember. Chuck Norris is 84 years old in 2025. No longer the unbeatable warrior that jokes praise, but a man who has been completely changed by scars, survival, and the harsh knowledge that comes from losing things you can't get back. Change. His days now have rhythms that are set by necessity, not desire. Getting up start with a careful schedule of medicines. Blood thinners to keep the stances in his arteries. Beta blockers are used to keep a heart that has been cut open twice and checked. His doctors say that supplements will help him live a few more years. Every pill is a negotiating with death, and music that reminds us that focus alone can't beat time. As for physical exercise, once the walking slowly around his Texas ranch and carefully stretching have become the main things that make him who he is. A physical therapists come up with these routines. The powerful kicks that used to define his actions have been replaced by slow, careful ones that are meant to protect what little strength is left. Chuck says, "I'm not training to fight anymore. Be quiet. My goal is to train so that I don't hurt during the day." His body tells the story. His words won't work. The scars on his chest from bypass surgery. Joints are less stiff after years of being hit hard. Seeing that blurry without glasses. That's hard to hear in busy places. The internet says Chuck Norris is invincible, but he wakes up every morning dealing with the fact that he is not what he seems to be. Still, in this fragility, something deep has come to light. The person who used to measure music presence is used to measure success instead of awards and box office numbers. He plays with his brother for hours. Kids, Dakota and Danny Lee, not telling them how to behave or not strength, but just listening, telling stories, and making sure they know him not as the famous Chuck Norris, but as their dad. With his wife of 27 years, Gina, Chuck has found a partner that isn't interested in looks but in staying alive. Her job is Toby's doctor's visits, keeps an eye on his diet, and sits with him on the long nights when old pains come back to haunt him. His wounds keep him awake. Chuck said, "She's seen me at my weakest, and she stayed." That's strong. His wealth grew over 60 years. Music is still large. His net worth is thought to be around $70 million, which comes from residuals from movies, Walker, licensing of the Texas Rangers, and smart investments. But Chuck talks about money now with a cold, almost contemptuous look. The farms, the cars, and the memorabilia, it all seems less and less important. Instead, Chuck has put his money and time into projects that reflect the life he lived. Instead of the picture he showed. He told them about the Kickstart Kids program. Since it opened in 1990, it has taught martial arts to more than 100,000 musicians. He teaches young people all over Texas the same discipline that kept him out of his dad's shadow, even if it's just one kid. "Tang Soo Do helped me believe in myself," he says, "then everything I went through was worth it." He's also turned into loud and clear about supporting veterans, giving military families grants, and funding PTSD plans for treatment. Chuck says, "The Air Force saved my life. Japan gave me had no reason to do anything. I have a bill that I will never be able to fully pay back." When asked about his legacy, Chuck no longer talks about movies or titles. "I want people to remember me as someone who," he says, "I got back up. It wasn't because I was special, but because I wouldn't do not move." That's all any of us can do. The jokes keep going. Mr. Chuck Norris effects, music, still get around, make people laugh, and show him as the most powerful person in the world. Chuck now smiles at them because he gets the joke. Everyone in the world loves a story, while the man behind it struggles in the background to get through another day of music. That may be the greatest truth of he was Chuck Norris in 2025. He's not the tale. This is the person who he lived long enough to see the legend last longer than him. And now smart enough to know what's different. On his ranch in Texas, under the big clouds that have seen his, Chuck Norris sits with his wife, kids, and being aware that time is the one enemy that can't be beat. He also knows this, though a reputation isn't made in the ring or on the big screen. It was made in the love that is shown when the cameras are off, the quiet times, and the presence. Things have changed. Now the story of Chuck Norris comes back to you. What do you want to remember about this trip? A person who rose from the ashes of chaos and being poor. Who took over the world with training and strikes only to learn that the most important wins can't be had in arenas or on screens. Not everything about Chuck Norris is great. He failed as a dad. He put power ahead of intimacy. He wanted to be famous while losing the most important people in their lives. Still, maybe that is exactly what it is. His story is important. It makes us remember that tales aren't made, they're found perfect. They are made stronger by failing, humbling by losing, and saved by being chosen. You can't get rid of mistakes, you can only learn from them. Memes will keep going. Though the world will keep praising the myth that no one can beat you. But every roundhouse kick and stern look has a reason. For every impossible Chuck Norris fact, there is a man who had to learn it the most, the whole truth. What you can ruin doesn't show how strong you are, what you pick to protect. Dina, his daughter, died too soon. His brother Land, the last person who saw the beginning. Parts of his body were lying to him, these are the fights Chuck Norris lost. And by letting music mean that, by giving in to his own weakness, became something much stronger than unbeatable. He became a person. So ask, do you really want to build a kingdom at the cost of your family? You want to be successful in music, but you're missing the important times? Will you say the words that need to be said today instead of tomorrow? Chuck Norris sits the most important lesson. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you give now that you're still here. Leave your thoughts in the space below. Sign up to honor not only the heroes we honor, but also the weak and flawed ones. Music that has humanity in it. Also, keep in mind that the best strength is not on never fall. It's in rising over and over. Even when your body begs you not to keep lying down, as fighters do.